Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Reynolds, Vice President of Marketing with Episcopal Retirement Services, and I'm joined by several of our team members at our communities, both here in Cincinnati, Marjorie P. Lee and Dupree House here in Cincinnati, and the Episcopal Church Home down in Louisville. We're here for our virtual online meeting titled Communication Tips and Tactics for Caregivers of Those Living with Dementia. And we're here with our panelists, Megan Bradford and Shannon Braun, and they're going to be sharing some of their tips and tactics when engaging with loved ones living with dementia, by identifying challenges and recognizing our role as care partners. Common reactions to a person with dementia can become thoughtful responses that lead to positive interactions and improve quality of life. Excuse me. So I just want to introduce our two panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Megan Bradford, and I'm just going to throw up their pictures. Megan is our Vice President of Middle Market and Ministry and joined ERS team as a marketing team intern in 2009 while studying at Xavier University. During her time with ERS, Megan discovered her passion for a lifelong learning and serving older adults. Since then, Megan has held many diverse roles within the ERS organization, including experience as a licensed nursing home administrator, and most recently serving as the Director of Strategic Initiatives. So we welcome Megan. Shannon Braun is our Director for the ERS Center for Memory Support and Inclusion, who joined us in February of 2020. I believe I got that right, Shannon. As our Director, she oversees ERS's memory support efforts, including the oversight of our living environments, therapies, training programs for staff, along with our many community outreach programs, including Dementia Inclusive Cincinnati. She has a broad knowledge and expertise in the field of aging. Previously, she was the early stage coordinator with the Alzheimer's Association of Greater Cincinnati. In her 5 years at the Alzheimer's Association, where she was responsible for developing and managing education, support, engagement, and programs with community partners, and conducted counseling sessions with families and facilitated support groups. So she's a wonderful support. I would also be remiss in saying that Megan has done some wonderful work around Alzheimer's and dementia. She developed our dementia guidebook, which can be found on our website, which is a wonderful resource for caregivers. So welcome, ladies. I want to start off with a question for Shannon. So Shannon, what are some communication challenges that a person with dementia faces?
Brian, thank you. So people with dementia, I would say communication is probably one of the largest challenges that they face and that caregivers face in kind of engaging with them. So people that have memory loss, they tend to repeat themselves. It is a disease that affects our short-term memory primarily. Eventually down the road, it affects our long-term memory, but the short-term memory changes are kind of what really impacts the communication challenges themselves. So certainly there's challenges in expressing their thoughts and feelings. Concentration is impacted, attention span is impacted, and of course we know that would really impact our ability to communicate. So as you can see on the slide that Brian just shared, those thoughts and feelings are really hard to express, which causes frustration and can lead to some uncomfortable exchanges when people feel like they aren't being heard or they're not able to express themselves in the way that they used to. In the early stages of the disease process, the folks with dementia are very much aware that they're not communicating in the way that they want to or used to. So that can be extra frustrating for them. I've heard them explain to me that it feels like they're moving along okay, and then they hit a cliff in their ability to express themselves, and the bottom falls out and they're just not able to get it back. And so they lose that train of thought, which when that happens, they're aware of it. And so they're less likely to try and engage in conversation like that later. So part of our challenge is to recognize the importance of continuing to engage with people that have dementia despite these challenges, and so help them along. So the things that we can understand about communication can really help them stay engaged when they are feeling a little more self-conscious about it. So in addition to expressing those thoughts and feelings, there are issues with sequencing, which is kind of related to our executive functioning in the brain, our ability to carry out a task, starting with the first step and then the second step, that can really be impacted with dementia. So following directions can be hard, really managing your day. And then certainly language is impacted as well. So that could be both receiving language and expressing language. And the term that we use in the field is aphasia. So someone that has expressive aphasia, they might feel like they're making sense when they're speaking, but it's really kind of coming out nonsensically or gibberish, or not in the right order. And then there's also receptive aphasia, where I might be talking to someone that has dementia, but the way they're processing the words that I'm saying is getting jumbled up in their minds, and they're not able to, it sounds like I'm speaking gibberish and they're not quite able to understand it. So someone can have both expressive aphasia and receptive aphasia, or one of the other, which can really feel like we are speaking two separate languages. So that can be a challenge. Another thing that can really bother people, and this can happen very early on in the disease process too, a pretty early stage, is word finding problems. And that's something that I think we all can relate to. We've all had that word on the tip of our tongue that we just can't come up with. This just happens to people with dementia a little bit more frequently. And again, they're often aware of this early on, and it's frustrating. Typically, people lose nouns early on in their disease process and then lose verbs a little bit later. So they might lose proper nouns first, or they might really only be able to think of categories, like they used to be able to talk about the robins and the blue jays, but now they just talk about birds. Or they used to be able to talk about rain and snow, and now they just point out the window and say water. So we can kind of use our context clues to figure it out a little bit, but those are just some examples of the changes in language that can really make communication pretty difficult.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. So with that in mind, Megan, as Shannon's talked about some of these challenges, is there a best way of beginning a conversation with someone who has dementia?
Well, I think that's a great question, because whether it's our own loved one or someone in one of our communities that we're just hoping to engage with, it's really important that we focus on the approach. So I really try to remind people that it's not so much about the topic, about what you're trying to talk about or want to talk about. It's really about your approach. So first, I always like to remind people to create a welcoming and comfortable environment. And what do we mean by that? Really, if the goal is to just have a positive interaction, then smiling with eye contact may seem like common sense, but we often have to remind ourselves of that because we're in a busy, stressful world. We might be in a having a particularly stressful day. So just really being aware of that. Also, something that I've learned over time is that people with dementia, their vision tends to change throughout the disease process. So approaching a person from the front is really important. As the disease progresses, it's really common for peripheral vision to shrink. And so coming from the side or coming from behind can startle someone. So in order to just set the tone of having a positive interaction, approaching someone from the front and at eye level, if they're sitting down, just kind of sets you up for success to have that positive conversation. A couple of other tips to engage, I would say, would be monitoring the tone of your voice. This is really important. And Shannon will talk a little bit more about body language and those nonverbals. But when it comes to the tone of our voice, you can really tell how that person feels right now. So when you say, it's Thursday, and it's the 10th time someone with dementia has asked you what day of the week it is, when you say it's Thursday, we're frustrated, but they can sense that frustration and they might feel a couple of different things. One, she's really upset that it's Thursday. Or two, I've obviously asked this question before because she's very frustrated with me in sharing that it's Thursday. So tone is super important. I also like to touch on volume as well. So many older adults do have hearing loss, but we can't assume that. So it can really start a conversation off negatively when we are kind of overcompensating in our volume. A lot of times people with dementia, can snap right back and say, I'm not hard of hearing, I just have dementia. So really kind of monitor the tone and volume. Finally, I would say speaking slowly and distinctly. I think we're, in a world right now that's go, go, go. We're trying to accomplish things. We're trying to get things done. I'm just asking you a question. Can't you answer me? Let's go, go, go. And Shannon will talk a bit more about processing in a bit, but really allow the person time to answer and use short, familiar phrases to that person. So set them up for success. We like to use slang sometimes, and slang doesn't always mean the same things to an older generation than it might to us. So the more specific and basic we can be, we're just setting them up for success. And my last point about that is pronouns. So Shannon shared that sometimes nouns or proper nouns can leave people's memory first. Another note about pronouns is if I'm having trouble following the conversation or the sequencing of a story, even with our chaplains, we've talked about this. We're reading a chapter in the Bible and they're saying Jesus, and then they say him, and he did this, and then he went there. A couple sentences later, those pronouns don't mean much if I don't remember or recall that we're talking about Jesus. So feels a little awkward to us, but the more we can use the name of someone, the better to just orient the conversation and keep that person on the same page with you.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Great tips. And as you alluded to, earlier, so this question is now for Shannon. How is nonverbal communication important, and how can we best incorporate that into our interactions for those with dementia and Alzheimer's?
I think nonverbal communication is super important. As I said earlier, there's the language abilities and processing abilities really change over time. So if we're able to connect with someone on a nonverbal level, it might be easier and just more comfortable to get our message across. So we use nonverbals all the time, and I think just being more aware of them can be impactful. People with dementia, our social skills are very ingrained. We have them very early on in life. So if we're thinking about people with dementia losing those that short-term memory first, well, then social skills would be very long-term ingrained memory. So Approach, as Megan said, can be very important, and managing your body language. So making sure that your facial expressions kind of match the messaging that you want to get across. With masks through COVID, that's been a challenge, but I really worked to make eye contact and be very expressive with my eyebrows and with my eyes. And that was a way to engage with people when they weren't able to see my smile, because that's really an impactful way to connect with somebody, is using body language. We all can understand feelings a little bit longer than we can understand the words. And as Megan mentioned earlier, that being aware of processing time is really important. If someone doesn't understand me, their response might be, "What?" or "Can you repeat that?" Which would be the same thing that you would say if you didn't hear somebody. So I think recognizing that it's often a processing problem and not a hearing problem, as Megan said, we just know that we need to have an extra pause or extra time for someone to either respond to a question or to continue the engaging in the conversation. And I often tell people that if that feels a little bit awkward, that kind of pausing within the conversation, the awkwardness is typically felt with us, that I maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable, not necessarily the person with dementia. They're working really hard to keep up with the conversation. So that always helps me to know that this really isn't an awkward conversation. I'm just feeling a little bit uncomfortable because of the time that it's taking, but at least the other person isn't feeling that way. So I can't feel too bad. So I think keeping that in mind really helps too. And then lastly, physical touch can be tricky if it's unwanted, but if we are comfortable with the person and we're picking up signals from them that they're comfortable around us, I think physical touch can be very calming. If you're connecting with someone and you're holding their hands and you're making eye contact, even if the verbal conversation isn't there, or if you're able to take their arm and put your hand on their shoulder, that's very comforting and calming if they're confused about what's going on. Listening to music together can be a great way to interact with someone who maybe is no longer able to verbalize, and you can keep the time on their lap or on their knee, and that's another way that you can interact and really engage through physical touch and nonverbals, but still have a very meaningful interaction.
Well, that's thank you, Shannon. I think between your tips and Megan's tips about that positive engagement or the positive way we carry our body language, I can see how important that is in our interactions. So Megan, we've talked about how we should approach people. Is there anything that we should try and avoid when communicating with someone that has a dementia? Are there any kind of no-nos that you have? Any tips for that?
Yes, of course. There's always things when Shannon and I meet with people, we always think about the fact that the person with dementia most often isn't really able to self-regulate or understand where you're coming from. We have to join them in their reality and join them in where they want the conversation or the interaction to go. So a couple of tips related to that. I wanted to talk about it's kind of an approach, but it's also what to avoid. So years and years ago, a best practice was called reality orientation, which means that even in the hospital, when someone was confused or in a nursing home, we would orient the person to the day, the time, the place. So it is to 2022. It is not 1950. You are 85. You're not 35 with young children. You're in this hospital because you fell and broke your hip and have dementia and you're not safe to be at home by yourself. If that's not the reality I'm living in, all of those things are pretty upsetting, and also disorienting and confusing. So the thing that we like to focus on, instead of trying to have a person with dementia come to our reality, is something called validation therapy. So the headline for that is just prioritizing feelings over the facts. So again, it's a little odd in the world we live in, because it's a lot of I'm right, you're wrong. Let's fact check that. I'm going to make sure that you know that's wrong, and I'll show you why on my phone. None of that is really effective when our only goal is to have a positive interaction with someone with dementia. So to prioritize feelings, there's a few things to avoid that I wanted to highlight. One is that quizzing is not effective. As Shannon mentioned, it's a short-term memory loss most often, especially early on in the disease process. If you've ever been put on the spot or asked, don't you remember me? I know your name. Why don't you remember my name? That's a pretty crummy feeling. And we tend to do that even if it's not in a negative way or with a negative intention. We tend to quiz people with dementia quite a bit. Do you know who I am? Do you know where we are? Who's in this picture, Mom? Let's go through the picture. It's a really negative feeling when you're wrong. So quizzing with someone with dementia is not effective, because really it's going to hurt their feelings, and ultimately the person quizzing also gets upset or frustrated. So criticizing and correcting leads to arguments. So kind of the same idea. Correcting someone with dementia is a very short-term solution. And criticizing someone, again, you're going to get negative feelings towards each other, and that's not the goal. I always share with our staff, it seems obvious, but we have to remind ourselves that you're never going to win an argument with someone with dementia. It's really ineffective, and you both leave frustrated. I came home one night and was talking to my husband, and I said, so-and-so just wasn't getting it. I was trying to explain it, and we had a really, friendly conversation, but he just didn't get it. And he very appropriately said, well, it sounds like you were just nicely arguing. So even if we say things in a nice way, it's really not effective to criticize or correct or try to have someone believe you or believe what you're saying is true. And then finally, all of those things I would just summarize with fight the urge to be right or to win. Again, our culture, our current environment makes that hard to kind of turn off. But I love a tip that Shannon often gives people, care partners whose loved ones are in early stages of dementia and they're really struggling with that. Shannon always makes the point of, the people with dementia are not keeping score, right? They're not keeping track of, I won that argument. Oh, I won that one too. And the whole idea of just having a positive interaction is lose the battle to win the war. The war is just to end the conversation or the interaction or the day or the week on a good note. So no one's keeping track. It's not about right or wrong. Try to focus on the feelings and not the facts.
Those are great tips, Megan. Again, not keeping score and keeping those interactions positive are so important. And kind of leading into that, Shannon, I know a number of years ago, ERS worked with some experts and some partners on improv as a positive way of engaging with people. And a number of us here on this call from ERS have engaged in that training. But I wonder if you could talk about the power of improv and how that can be used as a positive tool to engage with those with dementia.
Sure. So it really is a great tool that helps us more easily do the things that Megan was just talking about. So improv, for those of you who need a refresher, If you're familiar with that old TV show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? Or if you've ever gone to Chicago Second City, or Upright Citizens Brigade in New York, there are improv troupes. And the whole goal of improv is that it's a non-scripted play. And so the improv actors, let's say that Megan and I were sharing a stage. And neither one of us has a script, and it's very spontaneous. Someone from the audience shouts out what the interaction is going to be, or the base of our play. And so the two of us have to just come up with it on the fly. I have no clue what she's going to say. She has no clue what I'm going to say. We don't know the setting. We don't know the year. We don't know anything. So you can compare that to a conversation with someone with dementia, where you're really never sure where they are in their history or in their life, or where they believe themselves to be. But the only way that the conversation can move forward is if we are comfortable joining their reality. That's really the only way that it can work. So the tenets of improv is a yes and attitude. I'm joining the stage with a yes, I am agreeing with the setting that Megan has created, even though I don't know what it is, and I'm adding to it. So I'm agreeing and adding and moving on from there. So it really is possible to practice this. And it's just a tool that if you know that the reality orientation is not good, but it's just hard to do because it's so easy for us to just want to correct and help the situation along. If we're able to recognize that a yes and attitude, or we can even say the words if it helps us to. It helps us go with the flow. It helps us join their reality. It's just a tool that we can use to move forward. And I have a quick example that I can give. When my inspiration for joining this field, or for dementia being my career, is that I lived with my grandmother, or she lived with us when I was in high school, and she had dementia. And she, she was watching some crime TV shows or something, but getting them confused with her own reality. And there was some famous case at the time that a husband may or may not have thrown his wife down the stairs and killed her. So my grandma, in her confusion, believed that she witnessed this event. And she would come out every day to the kitchen and tell my mom, Kath, I've witnessed a murder. I need to let someone know. And my mom, being an old school nurse, first tried to reality orient her. Mom, you're dreaming, or that was on TV, or you didn't see that in real life. You're getting confused. And then finally, my mom, unbeknownst to her, used an improv technique. And one day my grandma came out and she said, Kath, the woman was dead at the bottom of the stairs. I saw the whole thing. We need to do something about this. And my mom said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I'm absolutely going to call the police. We're going to take care of this. And she took her little walker and she went back in her room and never mentioned it again. And so it was that level of valuing that this was her feeling. She really believed that she had witnessed this horrible thing. And can you imagine trying to tell people and them just ignoring you, or saying you're just dreaming? So my mom's ability to join her reality, give an yes and attitude, that she was going to call the police. Obviously, she really didn't, but that was all my grandma needed to know, to feel heard, calm down, to know that it was no longer resting with her, this murder that she had witnessed, and that someone else was helping and taking care of it. So going with the flow in that way really helped that interaction, really eased my grandma's mind.
Well, that's a very interesting story, Shannon, and a great way to kind of exemplify, to your point, how to go with the flow, or that yes and mentality. So Megan, I know there's other strategies as well to that people could kind of rely on as well. Can you share some of these other tips that you've experienced and used in your career?
Sure. So Shannon's great at improv. Not all of us feel like a natural at that. But like Shannon said, I think just by going with the flow and joining someone else's reality, that is improvisation, right? We're not correcting them. We're saying yes, and as she said, actually saying those words will reframe your response instead of just reacting. So another good tip that you'll use improv throughout the process, but something that I've shared with care partners is the 3 R's, which is write, reassure, and redirect. So number 1, the person with dementia is always right. That's tricky, but it's true. If we're not going to correct and we're going to go with the flow, the person with dementia is always right. It's our job to try to reassure them and also to redirect them. So let's think about another example that we often come across with people in their moderate stages of dementia. When it's an older adult, maybe in their 70s or 80s or even 90s, and they're looking for their mom. There's something about your relationship with your mom that's comforting, and we find older adults with dementia are often looking for their mom or worried about their mom. So to start off with, they're right. So they're right that their mom is alive and that they want to find her. It's our job to kind of figure out why, to reassure them, and then if it's still going down that path, to redirect them. So reassuring someone who's looking for their mom, help them look for her, learn more about why they might be looking for her or missing her. If Shannon was living with dementia and looking for her mom, I might say, well, it sounds like we need to find her. Tell me a little bit about her. What does she look like? What are the things she likes to do? Does she like to travel? Does she cook? Try not to use those past tenses, because then we're implying that she's not there. And then redirecting someone, sometimes a person with dementia will really perseverate on that, and they're not going to let it go maybe as easily as Shannon's grandma did in her example. We might have to redirect. So we're going to acknowledge that they're right, reassure them, learn more about it, and then redirecting kind of comes along with changing topic, changing the scenery after you've, validated them and agreed with them and agreed with their feelings. Actually changing a physical environment could be helpful. So one idea would be, while you're looking for their mom, take a walk and change the conversation or the focus to something else that you can have a positive interaction about. Really want to emphasize with care partners that you kind of have all of these maybe 5 to 10 topics or stories that you can fall back on that are going to lead to a positive conversation. So that they loved going to Michigan every summer. So as you're walking and looking for mom, maybe you say, oh, you told me once about a time that you went to Michigan with your mom. Tell me about your summers spent in Michigan. And as you change topics and it's going to be a successful topic, you can slowly move away from the mom and the search for mom topic. And share those things with each other, share them with siblings, share them with other care partners that are supporting you and your loved one with dementia. So that when there is a difficult thing or something that isn't making sense or something that you want to move away from, a topic or a worry, you kind of have those things that can kind of redirect and refocus into a positive interaction.
Well, those are some great tips, Megan and Shannon. Certainly the theme that I hear coming from today is positive, whether it's the tone of your voice, your body language, ways to redirect in a positive way, certainly seem to be a key that I've picked up from you all and picked up over the years as I've had my interactions with many people with those living with Alzheimer's and dementia. So that really ends kind of the question and answer format that I had. I wanted to open it up for those of us that are joining here today for any questions that you all might have. Feel free to unmute yourselves right now and ask any questions of Shannon and Megan at this time.
So good morning. My name is Tom Torrey. Thank you. This is very helpful, and I'm sure for most of us who are dealing with this, a lot of familiar scenarios and dynamics you're shared. What's easier said than done, but my approach, and this is with my mother-in-law, is to pretty much acknowledge, and a lot of the things that you said, agree with her, regardless of where the conversation is going. And kind of my mantra is, unless she is talking about doing something that will put her in harm's way, it really doesn't matter, right? It's just to reinforce. So my question is, if they are talking about something that may put them in harm's way, how do you address that with folks?
I can take this one. So when you say may put them in harm's way, is that they're talking about a plan to hurt themselves, or
Just, yeah, so, or I want to go outside, I'm gonna, things that are harm's way is probably not the right term, unsafe circumstances. And it doesn't happen very often.
sure, yeah.
Frankly, but
Well, and I
obviously,
think, yeah, I understand your question, and I think it's a good one that can be kind of tricky because, first of all, we know that the communication isn't always accurate. Even though we're joining their reality, it doesn't really mean that we agree or feel the same way they feel. Like you're saying, you're just kind of going along with it to keep the peace. Typically, I would keep in mind that if someone is saying, I'm going to go outside, or I'm going to go get in my car and drive to the grocery store or whatever, they can want to do that and believe they are able to do it, but lack the ability to do it. So that's when we have to think, okay, can they get in the car? Do they have the skills that it takes to find the keys and start it up and all of that? If the answer is yes, then we need to make sure that we're putting barriers in the way to do that. Remove the car, move the keys, hide them, whatever we need to do to make that happen. Lock the doors, put special locks on the doors. So the act of keeping them safe, I would say, is a little bit separate from the conversation of what they want to do or what they believe they're able to do. So I think you can have both. You can say, oh yes, it is a lovely day for a walk. Or if it's snowing outside and it's a horrible day for a walk, you can try to distract with other things too. So I think that the communication, you can still join their reality and reassure and redirect and all of those kind of things, while you're also putting plans in place to make sure that they stay safe physically, kind of separate from that conversation.
thank you.
Sure.
Great question. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Hi.
I'm Kathy. Hi. Thank you guys for putting this together. It's very informative. My mom has been at the Episcopal home in Louisville for about 2 to 3 months now in the memory care unit. And I think all these tips that you guys are giving are fantastic and they make sense. But my mother is so angry, viciously angry at her situation, at me. She thinks I'm keeping her in prison. And I find it so hard to deal with her. For my mental health, she's always been a very difficult person. And I guess what you were talking about, wanting to be right and that kind of thing. And I kind of find myself doing that, like, this is why you're here. This is why you're here. And she doesn't believe me. And I guess I just want her to know that I'm right, so she'll understand why she's there. But I realize that that's not going to happen. So, I mean, how do you how do you work these things that you guys have been talking about, and when someone is so angry and vicious and hateful to you?
Another great. No, first of all, I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I really empathize with that, because it's so hard to make that choice and to move forward and do what you need to do. And we don't we don't enter caregiving or, helping parents age in a vacuum. We carry all the traumas that we've experienced, all the, issues that relationships are already exist. So I think it sounds like you know the right things. It's just doing them that's hard. It's very hard to turn off the logical part of our brain that wants to correct the scenario. I'm not a mean person, Mom. I'm trying to help you and take care of you. This is the best place, safest place for you to be. I'm doing my best. That's what we want to say. And that's what we can say to ourselves. That's what we can say to our support system, however that needs to happen, because that is the truth, Kathy. Separately, what we can say to your mom is recognize that she is angry. And that's often appropriate. We'd all be angry if we thought we were fine and that now here we are and we don't want to be here. This is not a choice we made. So we can acknowledge her anger. And then I think we can also try to distract, find something else for her to do. Ice cream is always helpful, something that she might love, or taking a walk and changing the environment a little bit, as Megan said. Another thing is recognizing triggers. If you yourself are a trigger for your mom's anger, if you visiting riles her up because now all of a sudden she has someone to direct it to, recognizing that maybe taking some steps back and removing yourself from the situation. Maybe she's not as angry with other people, with the staff, that she doesn't have this emotional connection to. So, and that's okay. I think we have to give ourselves permission to move forward in whichever way we need to move forward, and all those options apply.
Thank you.
I just want to echo what Shannon said, and that, the really, really difficult decision of, for someone like you, Kathy, having moved your mom in, this was a process and a really difficult decision. And I'm sure you anticipated some of what's happening now. And that has probably been a barrier. And now that you've finally been able to take the step, like Shannon said, give yourself permission. Your mom is being cared for. She's in a safe place. Fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, she's most mad at you. But you don't have to engage with her all the time. Maybe try short visits or less frequent visits just in this transition period. It's most likely a season, hopefully a very brief season. But just give yourself that permission and space too for your own, mental and emotional health. She's in good hands. And if you can have a 10-minute positive visit and come back a week or two later and have the same, then, our goal as an organization is that you can be the daughter again and not the bad guy and not the caregiver. So give yourself some grace and just know that it's a season, and that doesn't make it easier. But like Shannon said, find that support system outside of your mom that can kind of help with those emotions and feelings, because it's not easy when our loved ones take it out on us either.
Yeah.
So.
Can I ask one more quick question? I don't want to hijack the conversation, but
No, please do.
How do you feel about taking them out? Like, my mom loves to go to dinner, and we're supposed to take her out tomorrow night to dinner, but we have this big, knockdown drag out, last night with her. And, I'm kind of afraid she won't go back in. Maybe that's happened before, the care facility we were in before the Episcopal home. I mean, do you all recommend not taking them out when they're that angry, or?
I think if you have experienced that in the past and you're worried about it, then maybe it's not the best time to take her out. That doesn't mean that it's not possible in the future. You said that you know that that's something that she loves. I think acknowledging too that making our space a little bit smaller can be a little bit more comfortable for people with dementia. So as she's really working hard to adjust, it might be in the long run kinder for her to stay and acclimate before those outside trips happen. And then I think you can kind of dip your toe in the water, maybe walking outside around the place for a little bit and kind of seeing how that works. And because if that's something that she loves, you don't want to say never again. But I think recognizing that from a safety perspective, it sounds like maybe now is not the best time for her, and that's okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think too, something that's been effective in the past is if she has a favorite restaurant that does carry out, or something of that sort, I don't, we try not to say like it's okay to fib or lie or anything like that, but just to stretch the truth a bit to say, Mom, we couldn't get a reservation tonight, or the restaurant doesn't have, indoor seating right now because of COVID, whatever she might buy, and then to still bring dinner in and, have dinner, in the community together might give her a little piece of normalcy to still enjoy, having the dinner that she loves, but not necessarily leaving that safe, familiar place right now.
Okay.
You mean these facilities don't have great food?
Oh, they have wonderful food. I can say I just had one of the best lunches there. But sometimes mixing it up, in Cincinnati, Skyline chili is a real thing for people. It's not fancy, and it's not even, don't get mad at me, that good, but we all crave it once in a while. I know I don't really even enjoy it that much, but at least once a month, it sounds delicious. It's like I have to have it. So just mixing it up a little bit can feel like a treat to somebody, even if you're bringing it in instead of going out.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you so much. Any other questions out there?
I have a question about, not about dealing with the person with dementia, but when you're a couple, and I wish my wife had to go to an appointment. I wish she was still on, but sometimes, and that works both ways. Sometimes, and she's got more of the emotional baggage because it's her mom. It's a little bit easier as a son-in-law to be maybe a little bit more objective. You don't have all the emotional stuff going on. But we laugh about, we've gone through several seminars like this, and we laugh because 2 days later we acknowledge all the things that we should be doing, and then 2 days later we're doing the things that we were doing without taking into account the good ideas that are shared here. So going back to our old habits. So any advice on how to, in a productive way, critique or interject in a conversation where you see some of those dynamics starting to play out, and you're observing that with your spouse, and how to do that, how to deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I really like it. First of all, I want to say that being a supportive spouse, so supportive that you're hopping on this education call to learn tips and figure out how you can best be a teammate in this, I think is invaluable. And so you're already very very supportive and ahead of. I think what I do sometimes if I don't want to look like I'm walking down, into the memory support and educating the staff, I try modeling. So I might kind of help jump into the interaction and then model what I think it should be, how it should be playing out. And usually the person will pick up on it or will, hang back a little bit and kind of watch. So I think modeling can really work as an alternative to saying, now, remember, we had these certain tricks that we learned. Another thing too, I think always using we statements. And you just did that. You said that you both kind of forget the tips and fall back into your old ways. So rather than for your wife who's already probably feeling pretty emotional about it, rather than letting her know that you remember this thing that you learned, you can say, gosh, I know that it's hard for us to carry out these tips, but let's work together to do it. Or didn't we learn something about that? Let's try to do that this time or whatever. I think using those we statements and making yourself a part of it can really be helpful too.
I think too, it sounds like, you and your wife are, teammates in this together, which, like Shannon said, some people don't have that person right by their side to kind of navigate, kind of having that conversation. I know I've done this with my own family members, saying we tend to forget, or we get caught up in the moment, or it's emotional, or we truly, I'm the worst. I use the R word, remember, all the time with people with dementia. Of course, they don't remember. A resident once told me I don't remember I have dementia. Like, duh. But just to have this conversation in advance and have a safe space between the two of you to say, after our interactions or after something doesn't go well, let's be each other's accountability partners and just say, what did we do that we could do differently next time? Or, when did it go off the rails? Oh, it was when we started trying to tell mom that she was wrong about that. How could we do that differently next time? So kind of commit to each other that maybe you'll debrief after an unproductive interaction and not really call each other out so much, but kind of troubleshoot what to do differently next time. Might feel more collaborative.
Good ideas. How about when it's actually happening? So, I'm sitting there, my wife and I, we get to my mother-in-law's apartment, and all of a sudden there's this escalation, and I'm not throwing my wife in it because I get frustrated too. I really mean that, but I realize it's more challenging for her. So I find myself getting frustrated because I want to say, hey, just agree with her, or is that a productive time to have those type of interventions? Or do you have any tips on what to do then? Do you just let it play out and then have the discussion afterwards? What's the most productive way to do it, do you think?
There's no harm in saying, oh, let's take a break right now. Let's walk away for a second. And if things are escalating and you feel that that's a safe place to do that or whatever, I think that's fine. And to Megan's point, for debriefing after an interaction, I think you can also do it beforehand. You can have a conversation with your wife today and say, hey, why don't we, can we have a code word or something with each other? If I think something's really going off the rails, can I give you a certain look, or can we, signal or something so that we can help each other come down from an emotional encounter? I think that all of those really basic communication strategies of saying, hey, listen, we're on the same team, let's help each other out, even if it's in the moment. And how do you best want me to help you in the moment? What would be a good way that you think I can interject if I see things really falling apart? And you can definitely kind of strategize beforehand too.
Very, 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 very helpful. So I know we're coming to the end of our time. I do want to open it up for one more question, if anybody has any questions, and then we can wrap up. Anything else? Well, wonderful. I want to thank our panelists, Shannon Braun and Megan Bradford. Shannon, just want to let everyone know is a wonderful resource as you have questions. A lot of our folks within our communities really rely on her for some great advice and training. But at a local level, I want to make a few introductions of people both here in Cincinnati and in Louisville, and maybe give them a moment to just introduce themselves and their roles. We'll start here in Cincinnati. Karen Christopher is our Director of Community Relations at Marjorie P. Lee. Hi, Karen. How are you today?
Hi, and my card, it's actually Karen Immel now, so it's good
I'm
to
sorry.
see.
Old habits.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I am the Director of Community Relations at Marjorie P. Lee in Cincinnati. We have both assisted living memory support and skilled. I am primarily with assisted living, and that means physically they're in pretty good shape. They just need lots of cognitive redirection. And then we have somebody else that handles the skilled. We currently have 37 apartments in our assisted living, and our food's really good, Tom. I will send you a copy of the menu. And then if anyone wants information on Marjorie P. Lee memory support, I'm happy to give you any information. But when I responded to the Zoom with the Zoom link, I also gave you the dementia guide, and I can provide resources like that as well.
Right. Thank you, Karen. And in Louisville, I'd like to introduce Gree Seymour. Gree is our move-in coordinator and oversees life enrichment and also admissions for our memory support. So Gree, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for bringing us some very helpful information. Here in Louisville, we have a wonderful community Episcopal church home, and we have memory support, we have skilled nursing, long-term care, and we're also building an apartment building, a personal care apartment building, which is to be ready soon. In addition to all our wonderful independent living patio homes that my colleague Elizabeth is doing. So yes, I do admissions. Feel free to call me if there's any interest or just questions about how to navigate the system.
Great. Thank you, Gree. And just to underscore what Gree said, you know, Karen and Gree are there to be a help and a resource for those that live within our communities and outside of our communities. And we have a number of resources also on our website, a dementia guidebook, as I mentioned, that Megan authored several years ago, which is really a wonderful resource. We have blogs on the many topics on the issue of dementia and Alzheimer's, and helpful tips for caregivers there, podcasts, videos, and a lot more. So we encourage you to visit our website at episcopalretirement.org or .com, I'm sorry. And we have Facebook pages, Twitter pages, on LinkedIn as well. So a number of different places where you can find us for resources. But for now, again, I want to thank our panelists, Megan and Shannon, and on behalf of the entire team at Episcopal Retirement Services, Episcopal Church Home, Marjorie P. Lee, and Dupree House, thank you so much for joining us today, and please let us know how we can help you in your journey.